This is actually a pretty big year for the Grayling project, the Arctic Grayling Conservation Project for the Northern Lights chapter of Trout Unlimited Canada. It's actually the 10-year anniversary when we started this thing. We kicked it off 10 years ago. That was our first year that we had some volunteer anglers go out and fish on various parts of Dismal Creek and Rat Creek and more than a dozen other creeks and so on in the Upper Pembina region. We've done a huge number of activities over the years, from volunteer angling to water temperature monitoring. We had pit tags embedded in the fish, and we were able to recapture them. We had some monitor antennas in the water. We could monitor, see, and track where the fish were moving. We've got a drone video program, so we've got aerial photography of a number of the different areas. It's been a fascinating project over the years, and this is year number 10 of a 5-year project. We're doing slowly but surely, but we're making a lot of progress. And one of the things that happened as part of the activities that we undertook was that we discovered that there was really a lot less grayling out there than we thought. There was a 5-year closure, and this was the last year of the 5-year closure. So Mike's got some statistics and some information that he wants to share with us about what he's found out after this 5-year program. Now, we'll talk a little bit about, well, I can talk about it a little bit right now. The grant submission, we've got a grant submission in front of the ACA right now, so we're definitely looking forward to carrying on with our program this year. We'll carry on with the temperature monitoring and the video photography as well. And we've got something exciting lined up. There's a very good chance that, well, if we all get approved, there's a very good chance that we'll be out in the field again doing some volunteer angling. This time we're going to be collecting some fin clips for DNA analysis. And what we're doing is looking for compatibility of donor populations. So we're looking to see where there are some donor populations that might be able to, we could use as a stock for various places in the Upper Pembina. We do know that there are at least a couple of distinct populations of Arctic grayling, and we want to make sure that we're going to get some that are compatible with each other. So it could turn into a very exciting year for us here. This is an engagement session, so Mike's got some information to share, but he's also looking for input from us tonight. So if anybody's got any ideas or suggestions or wants to toss something out, we're going to leave it as a very open back and forth type program. Mike will probably start off with some slides, and you give us a little bit more background. You share some of the stuff that that you found with us, or you found along with us this year. And like I said, feel free to pop in with your question at any time. And I'll turn it over to Mike now.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Ken. So yeah, basically what Ken said is looking to have a conversation with you guys. I have a slideshow that I put together. It's going to focus mainly on the fish stuff, and not just this year. I've rolled together all the data that we have on fish from, well, not all the data, but I put together a summary so that we could have an idea kind of from the start to this year to see, so that you guys could get an idea of what we're looking at with some of this preliminary data right now. Okay, so yeah, it's just great that we could all get together in these different times. But yeah, I just wanted to talk to you guys. And what I noticed in building these slides, I came to and even throughout the webinars this week and in conversations having with Ken and Jim over the last few weeks here and since Christmas, is that I came to a realization of how far we've come. It felt like a really, really quick 5 years to me. It felt like a busy 5 years, and hearing Ken kind of give us that summary of the things that you guys have been involved in the last 10 years, I think these are really, really awesome accomplishments and things that should be celebrated. When you're talking about the things you're doing, I kind of felt bad. I felt like I should have had a drink and we should have did a little cheers there, because it is really cool, and I think that you guys should. The weight of what you guys are doing is really heavy in that like your group is very, very well known amongst provincial biologists and contributing positively towards fish recovery. I often hear positive comments regarding your guys' significant contributions to the point where most of the guys are quite envious that we're able, me and Ryan and the folks in Edson and such, and Jessica down in Red Deer even, and is that they're envious on the relationship that we have with you guys and how we're able to work together. So I just wanted to get that out in front because yeah, this even if we don't recover grayling to some sort of spectacular fishery, I think what we've built here is probably something that could be a model moving forward for stakeholder groups such as yourself working together. Like you guys realizing that this is an important thing, you guys are passionate, we're passionate, and between us and others, we could actually make things happen. And so I just wanted to say thanks to you guys for that, for sure, because I know I'm definitely grateful. So expectations for tonight is this, like Ken says, this is, I'm going to treat this kind of like an info session, a conversation. I want to share the preliminary data with you guys that we've summarized so far. Definitely want question and answers and feedback. This is, we don't have all the answers yet. We're still working through the data, but this is, I want to say this is the start of the data and the conversations as we're going to be working through this for a bit here. If I could get it to work. Boom. So yeah, so like I said, this we're kind of, sorry, it's been, not only has it been a quick 5 years and 10 years that we've been talking about, but we're fishing in a novel world, and I chose novel. That was no accident. 2020 has been pretty crazy with restrictions and changes the way we go about our daily business. One thing that's remained constant though is people's desire to go fishing and their ability to do so. As many of you guys probably noticed, many people have been flocking to the lakes and streams this year, especially to enjoy like a COVID-friendly outdoor activity. And we actually were able to draw almost perhaps a conclusion right off the bat after this year. There's nothing that's stopping us from going fishing, not even a global pandemic. This is one thing that's remaining constant. And novel times require novel approaches. These are indeed novel times. So because of this, I just wanted to also be upfront with a novel option we might want to consider for fish recovery. Okay, but joking aside, why are we here? So in the past, we've discussed recovery actions to try to promote fish recovery, and things like water withdrawals, reduction of sedimentation, reduction of fragmentation, stream temperature monitoring. But tonight, let's focus on fish monitoring. So you guys helped me collect all this fish data. We've collected fish data. We're monitoring what indicators we could see with the fishing closure, along with all these other things. So tonight's focus is, I'm going to try to stick to fish monitoring. So, because we've talked about the limiting factors already: fragmentation, sedimentation, habitat degradation, and sedimentation. These are all the main things that we're seeing in the Pembina that we think are things that we have to overcome or mitigate. So, and of course, angling mortality is the one that we're testing with the closure. So looking back, I always got to look back to make sure that we're doing what we set out to do, and if we're not, why? So I pulled this slide. Actually, this is the exact slide I pulled from, I can't remember the exact date, but it was October 2015. I was sitting in front of you guys talking about this rest recovery period idea, and so this is the slide we talked about. Like Ken said, you guys have already been working in the Pembina for about 4 or 5 years, so we wanted to continue with the temperature monitoring and start working with you guys more closely. We talked about a movement assessment, so we put pit tags and fish to see if the logjam was a problem or a barrier to movement in Dismal Creek. We went out, we consulted with First Nations, we had public meetings, we had online surveys. We also we got support from land use professionals. So Paulette and I, we went and talked to forestry regulators, to water regulators, we went and talked to AER. And this were the things that we set out in front, our expectations of the fish enclosures. So we were expecting to see larger fish, increased relative abundance or more fish, increased distribution, and increased recruitment. So these are 4 indicators that we set out at the beginning, saying, if we have a chance at recovering this and we push the levers hard enough, these are the indicators that should let us know that we're going in the right direction or not. And so in year 5, we said we're going to come back and we're going to look at the assessment consultation. We weren't sure how this was going to look or what the engagement might look like and how long it would take. So we even back then we said maybe year 5 we're going to come back and talk about it, and potentially year 6. So indicators recovery, just so that we keep this in mind. So this is kind of how I have the data laid out right now, is to let's go and test these indicators, see if we've met any of these indicators of success or indicators of recovery. So we got larger fish, more fish in more places, and ultimately all of these things should and could lead to more recruitment, and the cycle goes on, creating more and more, right? Just remind you guys, so when we looked at methods, we used backpack electrofishing. Backpack electrofishing was specifically or mainly in the small tributaries. It's our standardized collection method for small fish, and it's the appropriate method for detecting YOI grayling or yearling grayling. So we also did sample angling, and of course you guys know a lot about that because you guys helped us with that. And sample angling is also a standard collection method for Arctic grayling. We use it, we have reference populations set up, the Little Smoky, we have risk thresholds developed from that, and we use that as one of our FSIs, or our Fish Sustainability Index, to get an idea of the level of risk Arctic grayling have on them. And the third method we used was raft electrofishing. So raft electrofishing is also a standard collection technique we use on the main stem rivers. It's really good for getting an idea of species composition within the river. It also gives us an idea of adult densities of Mount Whitefish, one of the fish that we're looking to give us an idea of what's recovering in the river. So we did all these things to the river, or we applied actions to the river, one of them being a fishing closure, or so we expect there to be reduced mortality because there's nobody catching fish or keeping fish. And so this should also help other fish that are being caught on hook and line as well. So that's why we're looking at Mount Whitefish as well. So this is the area we're looking at. So hopefully you can see here. So this black outline is the area of the closure. So all the way from the headwaters up near the Pembina River Road, in kind of the high foothills here, all the way past the Trunk Road, past Wolf Lake Road, and it ends around Lodgepole at Highway 753. And of course, it included the tributaries, main tributaries like Lovett, Dismal, Rat, Batty. So let's look at these indicators. Let's start with grayling. Indicator 1. So we're looking, can we detect fish getting larger through our actions? So I'm going to warn you right now, this is going to be a little bit graph heavy, but I know you guys love graphs, right? I know I do. I wasn't sure how else to show you guys, but I'm pretty sure you guys are pretty astute, and we'll make out fine. So on this axis here, this is Arctic grayling per hour. So we're using the standardized method of sample angling for adult Arctic grayling. And so basically as the bars get higher, that's more fish. The bottom of the graph is just the size of the fish. So this is in millimeters. So right now we're basically looking at, in 2014, we caught fish from 19 centimeters out to 30. So this is the entire watershed. When I say entire watershed, is I'm including data from the Pembina and Dismal Creek in here. And so that we could get an idea, because we're applying risk ranks to a watershed, and that's how our FSI works. So when we look at this, pretty flat, not a ton of fish in 2014. This is giving us an idea of the side of the line, are fish that were considered immature based on their size. And so for the most part, we're seeing a mature population, not a lot of recruitment or babies. By 2018, we're starting to see a few more fish and a little bit more recruitment, but fish not really getting a whole lot bigger yet. They're just kind of stretching out to about the same. By 2020, now we're seeing even more fish and even some more recruitment here. But if we're looking for larger fish, so I just drew a line in here. I would expect people would think a 14-inch grayling is a pretty good grayling. So when we look at 2014, we had some bigger fish out there, but by 2020, we're starting to see more bigger fish, or it appears to be. Cool. So let's look at Mount Whitefish. Are we getting larger Mount Whitefish? So same thing, this is how many fish on the side. The difference is the metric used to measure Mount Whitefish is fish per kilometer used from our raft electrofishing. So when we look at this, on the left side here is mostly immature fish, and then mature fish on the right side of the line. So in 2016, when we went, we've seen pretty decent amount of young Mount Whitefish, older Mount Whitefish, not a lot of big ones stretching out here past the 300s, but that's to be expected because prior to the closure, Mount Whitefish you were able to harvest Mount Whitefish over 300s or 30 centimeters. I just gotta get my millimeters and centimeters here, guys. Sorry. So interesting result we got in 2018. We went rafting, and a majority of the data was collected immediately after a high water peak, like extremely high water peak. So we think that may have had something to do with these data being kind of missing out on some of these smaller fish in here and some of these red bars that we got in 2016. And we've seen similar things with data in the Kakwa River. So when we look at 2019 data, this is likely a pretty good hypothesis in that, because we're still, all of a sudden these fish are back in the system. They didn't go away. What we are noticing here is by 2019, we're seeing a lot more larger fish and more of these blue bars or larger fish stretching out past 30 centimeters for Mount Whitefish. So it looks like Mount Whitefish are getting bigger as well. And this is just another one graph. So anything above this red line, just trying to declutter the chart for us so that we could see all these bars and more fish, more bigger fish. Okay, well, let's look at brook trout. So I know the plan isn't to create bigger brook trout, but like I said, if we're closing fishing and brook trout are typically caught on hook and line too, you would expect that we would see brook trout get larger as well. So 2014 data collected the same time we're collecting the grayling data, angling the same time, same way, same sites. And yeah, we had fish stretching out here to 35 centimeters all the way down to 100 millimeters. Similar thing or an interesting thing we've seen in the brook trout stuff in 2018 is it is one of the only ones that we've seen actually decrease in our angling data. Not sure why. One of the things we got to consider though is angling is it's a standardized method, and we have pretty reliable results when we're looking at catching Arctic grayling, but it might not be the best method for getting reliable and standardized results for brook trout. But anyways, by 2020, we seem to see a little bit more fish, not a lot more stretching out past the 12-inch category, I guess, would be a pretty decent brook trout when we compare 2014 to 2020, but we have some stretching out here, getting almost into the 40 centimeter range. So a few more bigger fish, but nothing really that noticeable, like compared to grayling and Mount Whitefish. Of course, we got to look at bull trout too. So bull trout, there's not a lot of bull trout in the Pemmel that we could decipher. This is, I think these two bars are basically two different fish that we caught in 2014, and they're in the 30 centimeter ranges. 2018, we caught a few more fish and a few bigger fish, but 2020, not a lot of difference. So I think basically what we're seeing is a lot of limited data, likely due to very, very low numbers. And this is what we would expect from very low densities, is kind of a patchy size distribution, while numbers potentially get better or not. So this is one of the things, is bull trout is still very, very high risk, and don't really see any kind of trend of larger fish, not in these data anyway. So indicator 2, so looks like we might have some larger fish in the system. Let's look at whether or not we have more fish in the system. So this is an interesting graph that we have here. So this is one of the products that we got through the NCNT project or program, working with a statistician out of BC. And basically all this is a trend analysis. So on the side here where it says seaweed, that's just catch rate. So angling catch rate, how many grayling did we catch in an hour of angling? And so on the bottom is just the years. Each one of these little dots in a row is just telling us what our catch rate was at a specific site. And so you can see like so in 2018, some sites were quite a bit better. And this smudge kind of gives us, it's just an interesting way to display kind of like the way the data is kind of spreading out or trending, kind of like almost like looking at a confidence interval, so to speak. These red lines are just identifying our FSI thresholds. So red being very high risk all the way up to very low risk in green. So the same colors and the thresholds. And this blue line is just identifying the trend. This red one behind here, we don't really need to pay attention to it too much. That one's just identifying the middle of the data. So the median of the data, just where the exact middle of the catch rate is in that data set. So when we look at this data, aside from the graph showing that we seem to be getting a few more higher catch rates as we go along time, it's really hard to see this trend. But when we spit out the analysis from this trend, basically what it's saying is that there's a really, really high probability that adult grayling are increasing 88% per year, according to these data, which is kind of a pretty cool thing. When we look at, we also have an output in this analysis. This is a risk analysis output. So it's another way of looking at the data on the left here, except looking at the risk. So the probability within one of those FSI categories. So the red bar means very, very high risk. And then there's high risk orange all the way up to green, a very low risk. So in 2014, for example, these data suggest that we were 80%, there was a 80% probability that these data were showing that grayling were in a very high risk state. But by 2020 has reduced, the probability of being in a very high risk state was somewhere around 30%. So we're seeing a trend, lower risk category. It's just another way of showing these data that I think is gives us a better idea, or an easier way to look at the trend aside from just reading the words here. So these are positive things in my mind. So what does that look like to an angler? So I built this just to give us a bit of a picture, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, I think. And so in 1999, Mike Brisky, fisheries biologist at the time, he actually went and interviewed a whole bunch of anglers that used to fish the Pembina River back in the day, so pre-70s and stuff. So I'm pretty sure he talked to Mr. O'Neill, because I'm pretty sure he was fishing it then. I'm not blaming you, Jim. You didn't kill them all, right? But so, anyways, so this is the data just to give us an idea, a bit of a baseline on what the Pembina was like. And so we have all this qualitative data, fishing stories, if you were, and what the guys said that were interviewed is that before the 70s, it would only take about 1 hour on average to catch anywhere from 1 to 3 graylings. So for the interest of this presentation, I'm going to say on average, fishermen tend to exaggerate what they catch. And so I'm going to say 1 angler hour to catch 1 grayling. Not just because sometimes we might exaggerate our catch, it's way easier math for me. So one of these little fisherman guys here to catch 1 of these little grayling on the right. So I think most of us would say if I caught a fish an hour, those are pretty okay fishing or fishing catch rates. By 2003, it took 10 hours to catch a grayling. So this is some of the work we did back in 2003 with the ACA program. And that's right after that, we went in 2014. And by 2014, prior to the closure, we were looking at 33 hours to catch a grayling. lo and behold, last year, now we're looking at 5 hours to catch one grayling. So just gonna give you guys an idea of where we were, how bad things seem to have been, and how things are kind of looking right now, or at least in 2020. Okay, carrying on with more fish. So same as before with the grayling, but now we're looking at Mount Whitefish. This is the same graph. The difference here is the CUE, or this catch rate, is based on mountain whitefish per kilometer. So this is the rafting data. So you can see all these little points are catch rates at each one of our sites, and these are our thresholds here: our very high risk, our high risk, and this blue line is trending upwards. Basically what it's saying is that we got a really high probability that mountain whitefish, adult mountain whitefish, are increasing 150% per year. So just to keep that in perspective, so this is, it sounds like really high numbers, but when you're starting at a very high risk, it's like putting money in the bank. When it's hard to get a lot of interest on a little bit of money. But this is also showing the difference between mountain whitefish and grayling, in that grayling maybe we're dealing with trying to get interest on pennies, whereas mountain whitefish, we're getting interest on maybe lutings. Same thing, here's the risk analysis. 2016, they were actually considered very high risk at that time. We hadn't had the mountain whitefish FSI set up yet. Now that we have it set up, we have an idea and some thresholds. So this is adult mountain whitefish, and same thing, the risk categories seem to be reducing. Let's look at brook trout. So we don't have an FSI for brook trout for obvious reasons. We're not managing for brook trout yet. It's a non-native species, but we like to catch them, and they're in the river, so we're still looking at them. Like I said, the brook trout data aren't as clear cut as maybe some of the others, or not showing a trend. So the trend, well, the blue line is the trend from 2014 to 2020. This red line is, I think, maybe throwing the eye off just because it's going to the middle of the data. But similar things, we have a pretty high probability, 70% probability that brook trout are increasing at about 66% per year. So again, we could look at bull trout. So these are angling catch rates. Look at this line, it looks fairly flat, but it does have a bit of an incline. And same thing, it's showing that 68% probability of a 36% increase per year. But because the data were so sparse, I also was able to pull up the electrofishing. So we have, the FSI was set up for bull trout originally using angling and electrofishing data because of our lack of data. So we actually have thresholds for both, and accepted techniques of angling or electrofishing for bull trout. So I looked at both, and they both seem to be telling a similar story. Modest increases with a fairly high probability of or high belief. So I could show you the risk category, but you're not going to see much because there's such high risk. Both of these graphs, you're not even seeing the threshold of very high risk because of the scale of the graph. It had to zoom in that I can't even see the first red line up here. So they're obviously they're still at very high risk. So we looked at our fish getting bigger. We looked at the last one, are we getting more fish? Indicator 3 on success of potential success of recovery is are there fish in more places? So this is just the map I showed you before of the Pembina, identifying the Trunk Road and the Wolf Lake Road and Lodgepole, just for a reference. This blue line is showing where we actually went and sampled, so where we angled for Arctic grayling. And so we sampled 18 sites. So in 2014, out of those 18 sites, we detected grayling in 10 of them. And so you see all these little happy faces here. This is Dismal Creek in 2014. So no surprise to you guys, most of the fish are in Dismal Creek, and that's kind of what we're hanging our hat on a bit as a potential source population to recover this watershed. or the upper portion of this watershed. In 2018, when we went back and did the same sites, similar things we're seeing in Dismal Creek, but we're seeing a few more spots, pretty similar spots in Dismal, so 11 out of 18. And then by 2020, we actually were able to catch grayling in 14 out of 18 of the sites, all throughout Dismal, most of the fish in Dismal, and a few more fish in the main stem Pembina at different sites. This yellow section here is kind of the area where we used to catch grayling all the way up into, and kind of, I guess, where we're looking and hoping that they would recover and become more of an increase in population and distribution. So that's kind of the area we're looking to fill moving forward here. So we looked at fish in more places and we looked at more fish. So what happens when we look at more fish in more places? So this is what this is hoping to illustrate to you guys. So same thing on the left side here. This is our catch rate, our angling catch rate of adult Arctic grayling per hour. Each one of these things are just the labels of each site. So each one of these letter number combinations is a site. Here's Sundance Road. And so all of these sites here are the Pembina River. So the main stem Pembina River section, and all of the sites here are Dismal Creek. So this is just trying to give you guys an idea. And moving from left to right, we're going from upstream to downstream. So upstream down to Sundance Road. These are the sites we caught grayling at. Very few. I think there was one at each one of these sites and a couple at 32. And then Dismal Creek, same thing, coming from Sundance Road and going downstream to the mouth. We're looking at the number of fish we caught. The higher the bar, the more the fish. I think 51. So somewhere in here is Wolf Lake Road between 51 and 52. So when we look at 2018 data, this was the interesting year. We went a little bit later in Dismal Creek. Fish seemed to be stacked up in a couple pools in 58 and 48, but we also started to see a few more fish in the main stem Pembina. By 2020, Dismal Creek seemed to be seeing a lot more fish. I guess a lot more is a relative term, but we're seeing more fish throughout the Dismal Creek, and we're starting to see a few smatterings of grayling throughout the Pembina. So same thing, same program here, looking at mountain whitefish. But for the most part, mountain whitefish, we've seen them through the entire upper river, but lower down, as you get downstream of Wolf Lake Road, water gets a little bit warmer. We're transitioning into more of a pike walleye water, but mountain whitefish live down here too. So these are the sites where we went raft electrofishing. So 2016, 19 out of 25 sites, we found mountain whitefish. By 2018, we're getting 21 out of 25. And by 2019, we were actually catching mountain whitefish at every one of our sites. So when we look at more fish in more places, similar graph here in that this is the upstream number. Site 1 is upstream. So this would be coming from the Lovett Confluence at the Trunk Road all the way down to Sundance Road. Between Sundance Road and Wolf Lake Road wasn't sampled. And then from Wolf Lake Road down. So 2016, most of our mountain whitefish were upstream and a few kicking around downstream. 2018, we didn't see a lot of change aside from we caught a fewer mountain whitefish in 2018. 2020, we started catching more whitefish again, and we actually caught them at every site downstream as well. So we've seen more fish, more places. Give us an idea of what we're looking at. So I just drew a line here just for reference, and it happens to be a yellow line, which lines up with our FSI category threshold. So when we're looking at 2016 data, one of these sites was pushing through the threshold of a moderate risk category, and this moderate risk category is the threshold we use to identify whether or not a fishery is ready to be harvested or potentially could have a harvest regulation on it for sustainable harvest. When we look down at 2019, we're starting to see a lot more of these sites pushing through, and the lower sites even starting to climb a bit. So still looking for fish in more places. I didn't do a map for brook trout for the Upper McLeod. We don't catch them, sorry, Upper McLeod, the Upper Pembina. These are angling data. We catch them at pretty much every site, except I'm lying because we didn't catch them at site 11 here, but didn't think the map was necessary. We're looking at more fish in more places. Let's see what we can find here. So 2018, we had quite a few fish in the middle here, or 2014, sorry, 2018. Yeah, the angling data on brook trout, like we talked about before, is we're not sure how to interpret these. But when we look at the 2019 data, we're not seeing a lot of different increases throughout, but what is sticking out a little bit here is we may not see increases throughout these sites, but for some reason we're seeing increases in these lower down sites near Sundance Road. So bull trout, like I said, bull trout were really spotty. 2014, I think we caught 1 or 2 bull trout, kind of in the similar area where we typically catch grayling in the main stem Pembina. Then we started catching a few more upstream of the trunk road more. And then 2020, we got a few more in here. So actually this is what's kind of really interesting on this is these 2 bull trout sites or captures down here in 2020 were probably some of the lower ones we have on record. Not sure why that is. It could be for a number of reasons, but this was pretty neat to see. When we look at more fish in more places, bull trout are pretty patchy data, pretty similar to the ones we've seen before. We're not seeing a lot more bull trout in a lot more places. We're just catching a few here or there. So fish were getting bigger. It looks like fish might be getting bigger. Looks like we have more fish. Looks like we're starting to see fish in more places. Now let's look at, are we growing baby fish, or are the baby fish becoming older, bigger? Are we recruiting more fish? So when we look at Arctic grayling, this is the same graph as before. When we're looking at a trend line, the trend line here looks pretty weak. But when we do the math, it looks like a high probability of a trend moving upwards at about 77%. When we look at the risk table, still very high risk. You can see it in this graph. Everything's still below the red line, and in this risk chart as well.
So what's the size of fish to be counted in the slide?
So these will be Arctic grayling less than 208 millimeters. So essentially less than 20 centimeters. So yeah, so this isn't a measure of young of the year. This is a measure of immature Arctic grayling. So when we look at mountain whitefish, this one is probably one of the most obvious trends that we have, or that in this data set, where this would be mountain whitefish, immature mountain whitefish as our surrogate that we're looking at for potential recruitment. And these guys will be, I'm trying to remember now what immature mountain whitefish, what the cutoff is, Ken. It'll be in the 200 somewhere. I'd have to go back and look. It's in this
221.
221. Thanks, Ryan. So when we look at the math, so even the immature mountain whitefish have a high probability of increase, so trending upwards. And the risk graph seems to show it a lot better when we look at the high risk category dropping quite from almost 75 down to 25, and even starting to see a little bit of green creeping in here. So when we look at the brook trout, one of the things we're maybe worried about a little bit, or maybe not worried about a little bit, is, so if brook trout may or may not be a problem, aren't we worried about brook trout taking over the stream? So the tributary, or the graph on the left here is electrofishing data. So like we know, brook trout are spawning in the tributaries and the streams, the smaller tributaries and stream. So that's why we're using backpack electrofishing data for this graph. But when we look at the data, it looks like a pretty flat line. We don't see any trend at first. Ooh, it missed the box. Sorry, it's over here. So we don't seem to be trending upwards too much. According to the data, it's about 2% per year. When we first looked at that, it was a little tiny bit baffling. Then we thought about for a sec, well, we're measuring tributary fish here. Although we closed the fishery, we're probably not seeing a lot of angling pressure or any angling pressure in some of these small tributary streams for brook trout. And most of these data are from upstream the trunk road, where we didn't do any kind of habitat enhancements per se. And there's not a lot going on up there right now with regards, or in the recent past, with any kind of major sedimentation or fragmentation. So when we think about it that way, maybe we wouldn't expect to see a big change in brook trout in the tributaries. That, and when we've seen the brook trout data in the main stem, we weren't seeing any real big increases of adults either. So that might help explain that's why this line is flat. So bull trout, immature bull trout, same thing. These are backpack electrofishing data. This graph probably doesn't mean much to you guys other than we only went for 2 years. Last year, me and Ryan weren't able to get that third point to see what kind of trend we have. But basically, we catch bull trout electrofishing at 3 of our sites. So they're mostly upstream of the trunk road, and even in and around the area of the Sundance Road. So really, really high up. And of course, still very high risk. So that's the data set I wanted to show you guys. So a summary and next steps. What we're seeing is trends are positive for all of the sport fish for the most part. Cautiously optimistic though. We're not exactly sure what caused it. We did a lot of good things in the watershed, but we just need to dig in a little bit more to see. Basically what we can say is things that we're doing in the watershed are definitely not hurting the fish, and that combined with potentially natural processes in the river like flows and temperatures are likely combining to help these fish along right now. So we need to complete the analysis. Like I said, follow the rest of these bunny trails if you were, and we have a science group that we're working with together. So folks like Mike Sullivan, Jessica Riley, and a bunch of other folks that we're working with right now to discuss the results, make sure we get this right, discuss options, potential trade-offs, and then do the same thing with folks like yourself and other stakeholders. Come back to you guys, talk about what these results look like, get a better interpretation of what we're seeing, and what the options and trade-offs are. So from that, we could we could work together to develop objectives and potential regulations and a plan for the Pembina River moving forward. And that's all I have for tonight. But yeah, I definitely want to hear you guys' thoughts. Any questions you might have. I could leave the presentation on here if you guys if you want me to go back and explain something, or if you want to look at something again, feel free. But the floor is open. And any suggestions we have, Ryan's going to take notes for us. So yeah, we're looking for feedback for sure.
So based on your last comment there, Mike, you said regulation changes for 21, 22. That I would read into that we'll have another year of closure anyway. Is that correct?
So that's the plan right now. I'm not the one that makes the decisions, but we're not looking to make a hasty decision because we haven't been able to really dig into the data and get an idea what's going on. If we plan to continue to work towards recovery of Arctic grayling, and we put in a 5-year closure, and then we decide over year 6, while the fishery is open to fishing, that, hey, this was a really good idea, let's continue to do this. We don't want to jeopardize that by by opening it instantly without really just talking it over with everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
What do you think of catch and release?
What do I think of catch and release? So like for the Pembina moving forward?
Yes. Soon.
Soon? Yeah. Well,
I'm not sure how to phrase this.
No, that's okay. So it's a that's a really hard question, but moving catch and release definitely has its place. I think we've proven it to be pretty useful in things like walleye fisheries. I think it could be useful in Lodic fisheries. I think one of the issues we might be having with catch and release right now is if we're using it in, let's say, for example, an Arctic grayling population in the Upper Pembina, it might just be a little bit too much incidental mortality or kind of hooking mortality right now, just because there are so few fish in that main stem Pembina right now. It's just enough to keep them from busting the bank, so to speak. We're just keeping our hand on them a little bit. We're not letting them get up. Once we let them get up, it's just like a bank investment, right? So if you have more fish, you have more money in the bank, your investment gets way greater returns. Trying to put any kind of pressure on these fish right now, I think would be tough. We did it from 2004 to 2016, and things seemed to get worse. I'm not saying it was only fishing. There was a lot of things going on in the watershed at the time. Since the closure was enacted in 2016, we had a lot of good things happening in the watershed. So I think it had to do with a lot of things, with potentially water withdrawals in Dismal Creek, reduced sedimentation from the mine, reduced fragmentation working through the water course crossing initiative, and even increased education and awareness. You guys have been working in the watershed now for 10 years. A lot of people, you say Pembina River now in Alberta, people know where it is. People know that there's a lot of stuff going on. And when I say things like Northern Lights fly fishers, they're like, hey, that's the guys working in the Pembina. So it's getting a lot of press, not all of it good, not all of it bad. So, but that's press is press, right? And so the short answer is I think our catch and release has its place, but maybe not in really, really depressed populations.
Oh, you answered my question.
Good.
Mike, can you make any comparison of water quality from 14 to 20?
Water quality. So with regards to sedimentation or?
All of it, yeah.
I can't. So we didn't measure any water quality in the Pembina River. Aside from the only thing we measured was stream temperature, like you guys. The only thing we know is the good things that are happening in the Pembina River with regards to reductions. So fixing sediment sinks and stream crossings and stuff. So I guess the short answer is nope. We haven't measured any water quality. Is there something specific you're thinking of?
No, I was just wondering, like, it looked like your year 18 was kind of a downer year.
Yeah, 2018 was a really interesting year. I could show you something that's super. What happened? So grayling seemed to be okay, but when we looked at the actual, sorry, just crushing through here. I can't show it. So
while you're looking for them, Mike, I'll just add to your or just put a 2 cents worth in on water quality.
Yeah,
we
go ahead.
did some qualitative water quality analysis previous season. So we had 5 or 6 sites, but it was only for the 1 year, and we did the full analysis. So a number of chemical and biological measures of the water, and across the entire system, there was one spot that was outside a norm, and I think it was Rat Creek. There was a high iron level, but overall water quality was okay. But like I said, that was only a one sample in 1 year.
Yeah, and one thing, so we typically don't look at water quality a lot, especially when we're seeing other fish in the water. So one thing you might, one person might make the observation, well, there's not a lot of grayling and not a lot of bull trout in the watershed. It might be a water quality issue, but then when you look, there's quite a few mountain whitefish. So we would expect if it's a water quality issue, that sensitive species like mountain whitefish, we would see similar things happening to them as well. But one of the things we think might have happened in 2018, I think you guys can see my graph now here, is that this top graph is water flows from 2018. This blue line is showing our flows. So this big, really high spike here is 225 cubic meters per second. So a really, really high peak in the flow in the Pembina River. And we sampled right after. So what happens, we think, after really, really high flows, when you go sample on the river with the raft, is that a lot of those smaller fish could be missing in our catch. They tend to kind of sneak out, hide in the tributaries and stuff. And when we compare to, say, like a data set down here, like in 2016, that we had little peak flows here, nothing major. These are like minor rainstorm events, like up to 70 cubic meters per second. So yeah, these are pretty normal flows. But when you go in right after a really, really high peak flow, like 225 or 250, really high peaks, we tend to see fluctuation in our data catch. It changes the efficiency of our method. And what we were able to, when we actually drilled down into the data, when we're looking at mountain whitefish, these are all the mountain whitefish we're looking at here. And those sites that we sampled right after that peak flow were sites 4 to 3. And what we're seeing here on this graph is the difference is 2016, we caught a lot of these fish at the sites. 2018, we didn't see a lot of them. And those were the sites that we sampled after the peak flow. When we go look over at this graph here, this graph here of mature fish, I just split them out into matures and immatures just to get an idea of fish size, thinking that smaller fish are the ones that are going to seek more refuge. When we pull out all these immature fish seem to be missing here in 2018, but when we looked at just the mature fish, we seem to be getting pretty reliable and similar estimates of fish capture. So this is one of the reasons as well why we use things like adult densities when we're as a metric for fish when we're monitoring fishes. So because there's lots of other reasons why small fish we have issues with capture. Some of it actually is attributed to gear too. So fishing rods typically catch grayling that are bigger than 15 centimeters, and same thing with electrofishing, it's a little bit biased to larger fish.
Mike, I have a question. So I think you mentioned, or maybe Ken did, that you want to get out and sample again this year, and that's I just want to make sure I understand, is that to help make a decision on how well this is working and whether or not to reopen the fishery for 2022, so that there's just that another data point to help in that decision making?
Yeah, absolutely, Leslie. So if the watershed remains closed this year, so if the powers that be say that this is a good thing, we're going to continue, and while we look at the data, then we will take that opportunity to go get another data point so that we could get better confidence in our trend data. If it is open, that's okay too. That I think we'll still be able to work in the watershed if, for example, I don't know if you're on when we're talking, so Ken put in some money, the group has put in some money, or put in a proposal for some money to look at the genetics and potential donor populations and what that may be, and so regardless of what happens in the Pembina, if that project is a go, we should be able to do that. It won't affect that, but yes, if it's closed, we'll definitely prioritize this so that we could strengthen those relationships.
That's great, thanks.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for doing this, by the way. I know it's put all this data together in short order to present. Been there, done that. It's tough to do, so thank you. But that, you know, ensuring you guys get another couple years of data points, I think is absolutely critical. And if there's some way we can support that, I think it would be crucial. The biologist in me is saying, was 2019, 2020, that last data point, just a really good production year? Was that, you know, high biomass, you know, right flows? Was that the Goldilocks year that we get high production? In which case, you know, we really need to know what that trend looks like over more than 2 data points over the baseline. So any way that, you know, we can help encourage the powers that be and let them know that this is critical and more data points are needed to show the trends and get the data you guys need to manage properly, please let us know.
Awesome. Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, like what you guys are doing right now is awesome. It's a great support. The only thing I could think of is it would be actually a letter of support from the group. I think we've got that. I think we've got a letter of support from you guys, or in some form or fashion back in the day when we were talking about other closures like this. But yeah, this is that would definitely go a long ways, I think. But that's definitely up to you guys for sure. But I totally agree with you with the trend data. That's one of the things we got to look at too, is to look back cast to see if we had like a boomer crop of fish 5 years ago or something like that. So right now, Ryan's working up the flow data and the temperature data so that we might be able to interpret as to why we might be seeing some of these spikes, like searching other hypotheses, why these might be the reason why they're
There's
happening.
some interesting trends with rate of change in temperature that I'm happy to share with you. We don't have to bore everybody on the call with this, but there's some really interesting impacts on salmonids with rate of change over averages and all of those pieces. Start to give some hints. We found some very interesting work when we did recovery of native species in other parts of the country on that. So happy to share that with you. And then my only other question, and I'll mute myself again, is there any effort being made or any goal to look at cumulative impacts? So, you know, where angling may be a factor, it may be sort of the tipping point, you know, the stream has pre-existing conditions. We've all heard that enough times. And, you know, you add that one last pressure and you're over that tipping point. I know it's a really tough thing to do, but is that something that you guys are looking at, or is that a goal?
Yeah, that's a goal. I think, I'm not sure if you're familiar with our Joe models that we're building. So right now, the Arctic grayling does not have a Joe model developed for it, but that is one of the ones in the queue. One I'm really pushing hard for, because it'll really come in handy, especially along with this project. And for those of you and for everyone and for me, just the quick and dirty on the Joe models is it basically takes all of the threats and puts them into a model, and we're able to look at the threats and we get an output that gives us an idea of where the potential highest threat could be. Basically forms a hypothesis suggesting that, oh, maybe angling's an issue or maybe sediment's an issue, so that we could direct our recovery actions to that and test that hypothesis by. So right now we're kind of testing a hypothesis right now. We don't have a model saying it is angling or angling is one of the main things. The Pembina was kind of in such dire straits that we were running out of options. So we were able to try this option, hoping that if we reboot the system really hard, that we could see indicators. So yeah, we really want to work on the cumulative effects thing. We have grayling, or we have the Athabasca rainbow trout model. We have the bull trout model. Right now we're working on hopefully getting an Arctic grayling model set up too. So it should be able to identify those threats and look at the cumulative effects.
Mike, I thought the data was really interesting, and it was really positive to see the changes as to the mountain whitefish as well. The one thing that I thought of while you were showing the slides on the mountain whitefish and showing how they were recovering and so on, is that although they're recovering and they're starting to feel a little better, and I think you even said they're at the threshold of a sustainable harvest, I remembered back to the snorkeling survey that we did in 2013. And we fished the pool first, and we saw that we were catching almost equal numbers of grayling and whitefish, but we actually went into the water with the cameras and took a look. The number of whitefish in there was way larger than the number of grayling.
Yep.
I think the impact of, or the potential impact of mortality on the grayling just being hook after hook after hook, I think it'd be bad to open it up, to just a whitefish fishery or something like that. An alarm bell went off when I heard you say potential harvest there.
Yeah, well, that's one of the key things about grayling fishing, right? Is their willingness to take a hook. I have very similar snorkeling anecdotes of actually up around the trunk road where I snorkeled at first and estimated about 100 whitefish and 3 grayling, and then I proceeded to angle it after, and I caught 6 grayling, no whitefish. So I didn't even see all the grayling just because there's so many whitefish and they tend to blend in sometimes. But yeah, there was a lot of whitefish there. I was pretty sure I'd catch whitefish, but the graylings tended to take the hook quicker and seemed to be pretty consistently reliable at taking our hook, whereas most whitefish tend to have a mind of their own sometimes. So you're preaching to the choir here, Ken. But thanks for the support.
So thank you very much, Mike. I wanted to follow up with, I thought, the very good questions that Sylvia and Leslie asked, and your comment about a letter from the club. What resources will you have, and what would be the priority for the Pembina among all the priorities and presumably budget constraints that you're going to encounter? Is the comment about a letter from the club really critical to help prioritize the Pembina?
I'm not sure if a letter from the club is critical, but we don't know it's critical until it happens, right? So scrambling to get a letter at the 11th hour, I think would be different than having one in hand and presenting it as we go forward. It's totally up to you guys for sure. Yeah, it's a suggestion. I know you guys support me, but it would be really cool if guys like the minister and he supported us. So, and what was the rest of your question? Sorry.
Well, I guess part of my question gets to sampling too.
Oh, right.
In 2021, with budgets, constraints, and so on, how much sampling will you be able to do? And are you concerned about that with regard to the comment about getting more data to support the trend or not? Because really, when you look at the data, you've really got a relatively small trend, and it's only because of 1 year.
So the cool thing about that Bayesian analysis is it's not as simple as just drawing the line. And so the trend is there, and it's based on all 3 years. But with regards to, but I totally agree with you. It's a 3-point trend. It's just starting a trend. So that 4th point is critical in giving us way more confidence in what we're seeing. A 4th point isn't gonna the be all. Like when we're talking about trend monitoring, we need many, many points, which is obviously a difficult thing for folks in the government when it comes to actually being able to dedicate funds and people to this. But with regards to your question for 2021, this is #1 priority on my list for next year. And that's saying lots, considering I'm also the Athabasca Rainbow Trout lead, and I have lots of things going on, or I don't have a lot of things going on with Athabasca Rainbow Trout, but I'm getting asked a lot of questions. But this is #1 priority for me. Far as I know, I have the support from my managers to do this work. When it comes to funding, I'm not sure we need a ton of funds other than my pay and Ryan's pay, and unless I get pulled out of the watershed, I'm going to find a way to make this happen next year. Basically, I need 2 feet and a heartbeat to get out there. I have the equipment. We know where the sites are. A lot of the legwork's already been done. So we've been in and out of this watershed for the last 5 years. So that's the easy part. The hard part that makes it difficult are things like water conditions and water flows. So we really wanted to get that 4th point last year, but we had a really, really high water event towards the end of July last year. And when it came down almost instantly to a point where we're watching it, and we're coming back from a weekend, getting ready to go, and by then it was already too low to float with the raft, and then it never did come back up into the middle or early August. So things like that are the things that worry me with regards to the raft fishing. The angling stuff, that's an easy thing. We typically do that in August when flows are more stable anyway. So, and that's another thing. If I'm not getting paid to do it, I'll do it like you guys. I'll volunteer. So that's just, I think it's too important, and we've started something here that we really need to get a little bit more clarity on.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Jeff.
Ryan, I spoke up for you.
No, that's reassuring. Thank you.
What is your position? You're satisfied with the progress to date, and you're just a little queasy about doing anything further, though.
No, I'm excited about the progress up to date, but
Yeah.
I think we need to we definitely need to dig in a little bit more to see what's happening here. I'm excited about the potential of this project, not just for the Pembina, but to move forward on any kind of other actions in the watershed. So, and I don't mean just angling closures either. I mean doing something meaningful to make a change in the watershed, not just fixing one culvert. So we have other watersheds on the go, like the Berlin River, where we're trying to get a whole-scale watershed remediation plan to reduce fragmentation. So we have lots of hanging culverts, and we're trying to get folks to work at a remediation at a watershed scale. So pushing big habitat levers, pushing big harvest levers or any kind of mortality levers, pushing things hard to shock the system to hopefully get it to going in the direction we want. Somebody asked Ryan a question.
There's a lot of good conversation here. I'm having trouble keeping up with the notes.
Well, he made his position clear. He doesn't want catch and release, which I think is one way we could help him further. Maybe.
Well, yeah, and moving forward, we're going to have to look at different options because not everyone's going to be in favor of a closure for a number of years. Not everyone's going to be in favor of catch release. Some people are going to harvest fish. We're going to have to look at those options, dig into the toolbox, the management toolbox, if you will, and see what some of those things might come out as, and try to identify the trade-offs as best as we can, and go forward.
Hello, it's Dan here. I believe it was in 2019, we were fishing in the Pembina Forks area, and driving along the road, noticed, even though there's signs up there, there's people fishing on the Pembina. And at the Forks there, we stopped, and there's a couple. They weren't fishing at the time, but they had their fishing rod there, and they were enjoying the sunshine, and took a walk over there, and oh no, we're not fishing. But the young lady says, oh yeah, I don't really know too much about fishing, but saw some fish rising over there. So, their vehicle was parked right underneath the sign that said it's closed. So there's still people out there after a long period of closures. They're still fishing it where they can get to.
Yep. And that's what we're seeing with the cameras right now. So when we had cameras out trying to get an idea of what that non-compliance might look like, we've seen exactly that, Dan. Was where we did see non-compliance was actually almost in plain view of the road, the easy accessible sites. These weren't people sneaking around trying to get into like a secret hidey hole in the back where fishing might be really good. These are people just pulling over at the pool under the bridge, tossing some casts. And for the most part, the cameras were set for 15-minute intervals. Most part, they'd be there for 15 minutes, maybe a half an hour. They weren't exactly like hanging out and camping there and putting a lot of pressure on it. But yeah, that's what we were seeing too. And when me and Ryan have approached a few people, and for the most part, people are, they're saying they just don't know. And same thing, one guy Ryan talked to, he was literally standing next to the sign, and Ryan was saying, well, you're not allowed to fish here. And the guy says, well, I don't know. Well, Ryan's like, well, look behind you at the sign.
His back cast was hitting the sign. So.
Yeah, that's one thing we're always going to deal with when modeling a closed fishery, we never set fishing to zero, because it's never zero. We see that in Mackenzie Creek. Mackenzie Creek's been closed to fishing since 2000, and we have cameras up at some of the pools, and people are still fishing it.
In that regard, Mike, does that speak to the fact that we don't have enough enforcement?
Perhaps. So like there's lots of work that like we have one guy in our ranks that he did his master's on enforcement as to how much enforcement is enough, and there is a bit of a threshold there where just adding more enforcement doesn't result in more compliance. Sure, more is better. Way more doesn't make a big difference. What we are doing with those data cameras, we're able to provide them to the enforcement staff, showing, hey, I kept asking, we meet with enforcement staff at least on an annual basis to help them set up their work plan, saying, here's our enforcement advisories, please go to Mackenzie Creek, please go to Pembina River. These are our highest priority fisheries right now with regards to, we don't want people fishing, or we don't want people taking too many fish, things like that. With the cameras, I was able to actually show them how many people are going in there, and then that got their attention. And then I simply summarized it to show them that they could go into Mackenzie Creek, for example, on any day, weekend, weekday, and have like a 90% probability of seeing someone that day. I couldn't say that they'd have a really high probability of getting a charge, but part of enforcement is just being seen. So that's the way some of the cameras are working, and that's how we're working with enforcement staff. So they've actually since then have had a pretty good presence, I think, in Mackenzie Creek for sure. Pembina River, one of the problems they have is they drive, it's also hard for them to drive all the way down and not talk to anyone. So they're balancing that act. But I have a pretty good relationship with the guys in Edson, and so they've been going down to the Pembina. As far as I know, they haven't charged anyone. And every time I go down there, well, many times when I go down there, I'm seeing people fishing, and I'm taking photos of license plates, a description of the vehicle and the people fishing, and I just give it to them. And they've been following up on that and talking to these folks as well. So if you ever see someone, because the reported poacher line is really, really cool, but we have no service down in like the Upper Pembina section. So yeah, a simple photograph of the license plate and the vehicle and a description is all they need, and they could look up the license plate. And a lot of times I've noticed even in lakes and stuff where I've sent these photos where I know folks are doing bad things, I send it to them, they're like, hey, they text me back, it's like, I know this guy, you're right, he probably is doing bad things. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to note the lack of cell coverage being a challenge for enforcement, but yep, you got it.
Mike, can I ask you one more question quick about this? Getting back to the trend lines again for the Arctic grayling numbers. You presented a percentage increase on a year-over-year basis, all things being equal, and the increase continues on that trend. How many years do you think it would take for that population to get to a sustainable level? I know that's a big ask, but I'm just throwing out as a general rule.
Yeah, I don't think there's a general rule for this, Jim. We could model it, and even then, we would have to test that, right? So it's really, really tough. I couldn't even fathom an answer right now. What we would expect is probably, like, we're seeing really good indications right now, but like Sylvia said, like, it could be just a really, really good year. We could have had a bumper crop come up. We could have fish moving around. We had really, really good flow conditions this year, good temperatures. Yeah, and it's really, really tough. when we're dealing with natural variation and such. But yeah, I couldn't even hazard a guess at how many years this could take.
Those numbers are high. I mean, if that trend continued, it would take very little time. I can't buy that that's going to be the actual trend. You know?
No. So when I think we had an increase of like over 100% of whitefish recruitment by year. But when you think about, so think of it, if we have 10 Mount Whitefish, 100% increase is only 10 more Mount Whitefish next year. So those numbers look really high, but that's why I was making sure you guys realize, although those numbers are high, like that trend line slope is still pretty low, and it's still within a very, very high risk category. They're promising. To be honest with you, when we started this, my biggest fear was that there would be no trend, or so. At least if the trend was continuing going down or going up, then that's a bit of an indication as if it's going up, maybe we're doing good things, we're doing no harm. If it still continues to go down, we either didn't push the lever hard enough, or we're not even able to detect the change, or what we're doing is absolutely wrong. So at least up and down gives us an idea of what we're doing is right or wrong. Bebopping around in the middle doesn't really help us. That's why we always talk about pushing the lever as hard as we can to see if we could incite a change.
Hey Mike, it's Carl here. That kind of leads well to my question. You mentioned RSI briefly. I'm just wondering, realistically, how long it would take to get that in place? So Ken mentioned getting genetics studies done this year, but Craig was saying as well, the hatchery is not even ready yet. So realistically, what could that look like?
So what that could look like is, with regards to the genetics, I would say that we have 75% of the genetics collected already. We have a plan in place for someone already to do the analysis this fall. So getting an idea of what those donor populations look like. So we're collecting data from the Pembina River on grayling genetics to get an idea of what the population structure kind of looks like, who lives where, and where we could take from if we choose to do any kind of restoration stocking upstream. What that could look like is we find a donor population, we find a recipient habitat where we could restore. That recipient habitat has the right habitat, it has the right community composition of fish. It doesn't have any, we look at the impacts, we're not going to go like, we're not going to start to restore a population, say, that's got a lot of sedimentation, or they're going to put a, I shouldn't say this out loud because I don't want to spur on anything. They're not going to put a mine there, things like that, right? We want to make sure that if we're going to do a restoration population to restore it, we got to find the recipient and we have to find the donors. If we find all that, then we know where we're going to get them from. What we would do is we'd actually collect Arctic grayling, and we could strip eggs, and we'd be able to work with the hatchery, and they would be able to keep them, harden the eggs, fertilize the eggs, and then we could do things like remote site incubation, similar to what they're doing in Montana, things that they're looking to do also in Michigan, things like that. That is an example of one way we could use Arctic grayling genetics and restoration using fish right from the Pembina.
Mike, out of curiosity, are you guys also considering?
What happened?
I think her battery might have died. She let me know. Yeah.
She was laughing. I'm like, oh no, did I freeze again? But everyone else was moving except for her. So great.
It was her. She sent me a text message. She was, I think, wondering if you're considering transplants. So presumably moving fish from one place to another rather than using the RSI technology.
Yeah, I would say it's not off the table. If that is the better technique, then that would be the way we would go. Some of the information coming out of Montana suggests fry might be better, but in my mind, it might be simpler to do transplants. I call it assisted migration. So if we could go collect really young fish, say from Dismal or Rat or wherever, we determine a donor population could be and move them, that would be great. Some of the literature suggests that moving fish like that, especially fish like Arctic grayling that tend to wander and could migrate long distances, might be in vain. So we're not sure. We'd probably want to take our best chance at recovery. So yeah, but no, ideally that would be a simpler way to do it. But
could you also, Mike? Could you also say collect a number of adults from Dismal, and then have Craig at the hatchery just keep them as broods, and then you'd have that genetic stock, and you could just keep pumping them into the Pembina watershed.
Yeah, Carl, that's an option for sure. The difficulty with having a brood stock at the hatchery sometimes is space, and also disease testing, things like that, and also making sure that we have enough adults to get the genetic variation we need. Lots of stuff out there too on any kind of brood stock in the hatchery, things like brood fit or hatchery grown fish tend to become domesticated as early as one generation. So things like that get a little tricky. Ideally, I think we would have a natural source population. So even if we had a brood stock, say similar to something like Joe Blake, right, where we had a place where we could keep Pembina fish, where they continue to spawn, we continue to have genetic variation, and at some interval we go and take eggs and move them, or take fish and move them, or whatever. But ideally we would look for some sort of natural stock. But yeah, that is an option as well.
In fairness to the hatcheries, and thanks for answering my question, even though I disappeared, Mike, by the way. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, in fairness to the hatcheries, they've got a really great system now, especially in Canadian hatcheries with rotational line crossings. I hate to admit it, I used to work for a hatchery. And they do a really great job at varying that genetics, the genetics of the population that they're stocking to maintain the diversity and have a really wild population. Unfortunately, that takes a big brood stock and it's a lot of money. And so, from an efficacy perspective, and certainly from an acceptance in the donor river, anytime you can transplant, whether it's eggs or adults, there's a cost effectiveness, and there's also a ecological effectiveness there too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough job they've got, and it's tough decisions guys like Mike have to make.
Well, I don't really make the decisions. I just try to lay everything out on the table.
We'll give you credit, don't worry.
I'm curious, just knowing that this is a quite a sensitive water. What is the pushback from some that want to open it? So is it political, or what is the pushback?
Honestly, Gerald, I haven't had a lot of pushback on the Pembina, like I have on some of the other initiatives in our area. A lot of people are just asking, when is it going to open? I'm not getting a lot of hate mail. If it is going to open, there's pressure somewhere that I don't know about. So
there are a lot of people though.
Pardon me?
There are a lot of people asking.
No, there's not a lot of people asking. So we get through our webinars and stuff. When people registered, they were able to spit out some questions before the webinar started, and I went through all those questions for the native trout webinar, for the regional ones, and there's a handful of people that asked, when is it going to open? And I think from the way the questions were asked, a lot of them were going through the regulations. They were just going, oh, Pembina, right. I heard 5-year closure, and that was kind of like the interval to go look. I think some people, when we say 5-year closure, there might be, people might interpret that as, okay, 5 years, this is a 5-year experiment, open, then close it and move on. I think because of the results, that's not something we want to entertain instantly without a little bit of thought. But yeah, I haven't had a lot of push. The only thing that concerns me a bit is maybe the atmosphere of fishing right now, and the way the government is looking at fishing at providing more harvest opportunities, more fishing opportunities seems to be the flavor of the day. So that's one of the things that that worries me a little bit. But other than that, yeah, I'm not getting a ton of hate mail over the Pembina.
Good. Yeah, it's good to hear.
Hate mail. That's cute.
So Mike, it's Paul here.
Yep.
Based on the 5-year closures and seeing that the trends that we did see, would it be fair to say another closure for another 5 years would be better to actually differentiate between the trends and see the climb?
I think it would be fair to say if we want to monitor a closure, we would need more years. Yes. Would it be fair to say that we're going to see that over the next 5 years? I couldn't tell you. Hopefully in this next year, if we could get the full complement of the data set, that'll give us a better answer. Unfortunately with biology and data such as this, we deal with a lot of uncertainty, and the more data points gives us better answers. But yeah, a 5-year window is I think a pretty manageable window and a palatable one for people such as you guys and me to sacrifice a fishing opportunity. So those and they're short enough yet long enough to get an idea of what might be going on. So potentially another 5-year is one of the things that could be considered.
Yeah, because right now you were saying you're only going off a 3-point position trend, right? So if you go
Yep.
another couple of years, now you're going 4 and 5 point, you should be able to see a climb, right?
We should be able to see something in a 10-year trend would definitely be more information than a 5-year trend, and there would be a lot more certainty in that estimate for sure.
But it could also lead to a lot of unhappy anglers too.
Yeah, it could be. When we think about it, yeah, the problem with the Pembina, I think, with it being closed is because its proximity to things like Edmonton, there's not a lot of grayling fisheries out there. But having said that, if you want to go fish to Pembina to catch grayling, you're probably not going to want to go to fish to Pembina to catch grayling. Maybe Dismal Creek, but Pembina's not your best place to go fishing for grayling right now. That's the only thing that kind of makes it, I think, stick in the crop. For the most part, we don't like closing fisheries. I don't want to close a fishery. If we have a better way to do it and keep or look at having grayling on a recovery trajectory and mount whitefish and even bull trout, we'll see what happens with bull trout, but that one is a way tougher hill to climb. Yeah, if there are other things that we could get results with that we don't have to close fisheries, I definitely would entertain that.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Even COVID masks.
Any other questions? We can look at wrapping it up here. That was actually a really good presentation, Mike. A lot of information there. A lot of very exciting stuff that I see in the coming years. So I'd just like to say thanks again for taking time out to come and visit us tonight. I know you have a lot of late evenings lately. So Ryan and Mike, thank you very much. And we'll call it a wrap here. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Look forward to hoping to get a whole bunch of you out fishing again this year.
Yeah, and like I said, this is just the start. So my expectation is that we'll continue working on this and check back in with you guys and others throughout the year, hopefully sooner than later. I just wanted to give you guys the exclusive first peek at what we've got so far and what we've seen, so that no one's kept in the dark, so to speak.
It's very exciting. Thanks again, Mike.
Okay,
Thanks
guys.
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.